Hey folks, it's Mike Klinowski from the USWRA. I have Bob Lopez with me, who's running for commissioner of the league. He has a storied past with our league and international involvement with the sport. Currently, one of our referees in the sport. If you haven't met him, don't know what to say. So here's Bob, and thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So, Bob, what's your history with the sport? What got you into wheelchair rugby?
What got me into it is my brother back in the late 80s. I know it's a long time ago. After he was injured and became a quadriplegic, and they were starting a team in the New York area, and he wasn't driving yet. So he asked if I would bring him to practice, which meant he was going to school out in Long Island and I was working in Manhattan. So me bringing him to practice meant I left work early, walked to Penn Station, took a railroad train out to Farmingdale, New York, walked a mile from the train station to the college where he was at, loaded him up into this old van that we had gotten for him that had a folding ramp that I pushed him up into the back so I can drive him to practice, bring him to practice. Of course, he enjoyed the game. While I was there, the person that was coaching, that was starting to team up for EPVA, asked if I would help out because they were doing a scrimmage the following week from a team from Boston, and could I referee? I mean, I've always been very interested in sports, but I'd never officiated any sport. So I was like, well, I've never done it. I've never seen the game, but I'll give it a shot. And that was January of 1990. In the game from Boston that came down was Joe Soares, Sebastian DiFrancesco, Niels Jorgensen, who are all in the Hall of Fame. And they borrowed a player from New York. And after each play, they were telling me what I was doing wrong. So that was my baptism by fire. It didn't scare me away. And, I helped out the team by helping run their practices for like 20 years and was on their board when they had some issues. And that's how I got started. I also, during that time, I've been on the US Referees Association board in different roles for most of the time there's been an association. And I've been fortunate enough to officiate in both Paralympics and World Championships internationally, and I've done other roles internationally, which over the 30 years, I mean, I still referee, as most of the people probably see me at enough tournaments and certainly at nationals. And I've gotten a lot from the game and I want to give some back.
Awesome. So you're running for commissioner. Can you tell us a little bit more of why you want to run for a commissioner and what, skill set you would bring to the role?
Well, I've been around the sport and seen how the board is run over the 30 plus years I've been involved. And part of it is I've had different roles on the board with the Referees Association, with the local team. So I know how boards work and how much work they can be. And I feel I can help this board improve. We always have room to improve. I mean, it's great that people give their time to be part of the board. I just want to give some time towards the board. And I think my experience will help me help the board succeed going forward.
Very cool. So what do you think are the critical issues that the league faces right now, and how would you help address them?
Well, the critical issues is, well, obviously the first one is returning to play, which is, I know the board has, released guidelines for going forward, and it's, certainly been a tough thing for the board to work on in the past year. And as we first return to play, there's going to be issues because there's so many unknowns. I mean, part of it is, we have rules in place as far as what teams, players, classifiers, and referees need to do, and it's reliant on everyone doing the right thing. And there's consequences if they don't. I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge going forward. Other challenge, I think, is the transition with classification to be in sync with the IWRF, because it impacts some players that before the change were eligible and going forward will not be eligible. And then how do we address what to do with those players and also get in line with IWRF? From working with classifiers on an international level, sitting in on classification, I know how difficult a job it is, and I have not nearly the knowledge they have in doing all the testing and judgments they make. And I think it's important that we get in line, in sync with the IWF, but also wanting to see how we can address keeping as many people still involved in the sport and able to play the sport. And that's something I think is needed to be looked at between players and classifiers to find a solution that works for everybody.
Gotcha. Excellent. Yeah, those are two major. I mean, the classification thing is pretty huge. The return to sport, I would like to throw in that while the board did work hard on this, a lot of work went into the COVID task force, like Mike Cottingham and that crew. They were phenomenal. So I just want to give them credit when we get a chance to give them credit.
No, of course. And the thing is, nothing gets, nothing should be just the board doing. It's the task force is a great example of getting other members of the rugby family involved to help get the work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it's, if we rely on just the board to do everything, things aren't going to work. It's important to involve as many players, coaches, classifiers, referees, or whatever, to help make the decisions, work on the different issues, so that way it doesn't fall to a select few. Yeah,
full agree. So speaking of working with folks, how do you feel about the relationship with USA Wheelchair Rugby and Lakeshore Foundation, and how do we improve our relationship with those organizations?
Well, starting with Lakeshore Foundation, I mean, Lakeshore Foundation has been a big help to the league in many ways. I mean, they host our Hall of Fame. They have a space on the wall in the main gym where there's tiles for each member of the Hall of Fame with various pictures. And as the home base of the U.S. national team for wheelchair rugby, that's a great thing that they've done and partnered with the USOC. I mean, they have a contract with USOC and the IP to run the high performance program, and that's great. And there needs to be a partnership between the USWRA and the national team. And from what I understand, like any relationship, it has its ups and downs. I think it's critical that we work together, because we're the feeding ground for the players that end up moving up to the team. That's where they first get looked at, first get spotted, and where they start to develop. So if we don't work together, it's going to reflect in how the national team does internationally. So and we both, the USWRA and the national team, obviously wants to do as best as they can. So it's really important to work together.
Yeah, I agree with that too. What about the IWRF?
Well, the IWRF, we're one of many nations that are members of it. And over the years, by participating as a referee, a head referee, evaluator, and being on the competition in the past for the IWRF, it's important that each country voices their opinion about things and work towards. But when the IWF sets guidelines, is that we may not agree initially, but we need to work together so that for the benefit of the sport. Mm-hmm. I mean, the sport has grown internationally tremendously from when the IWF started 27 or so years ago. And number of countries now compared to when I first officially internationally, there's 3 or 4 times as many countries and growing every year. And there's more and more competitions. And if we don't align well with IWRF, it's going to affect how the national team does, because classification, if it's is one example where we're different, and so a player, it plays as one level in the US, a different level international, I think in the long run puts that player at a disadvantage, because their roles might be slightly different based on the different classifications.
Mm-hmm.
And from doing the different roles over the years, there's many people in the IWF board and support operating committees that I've worked with in the past. So knowing people makes it easier to work with. And a lot of people there I know.
That would be an advantage for you, man. It's all about knowing which folks to talk to and when, and that is something that came up with classification, as you've talked about, making sure that we were interpreting things properly and setting things in motion that needed to be done to make sure that we were in compliance. Last thing we want to do is, especially after an additional year of waiting, to limit USA from competing. So,
and and there's people in the US that are classifiers that are also involved internationally that can help us, and that again, it's tapping into the resources that are already in the country to help make sure we do it appropriately.
Yeah. So tell me this. This is the last question for you. If there was one thing that you would like to work towards in the next 5 years for the league, what would it be?
Well, I think there's 2 things. One, I think the league should grow. I mean, we've been at around the same number of teams for quite a while now. It fluctuates by a couple, but there really hasn't been growth. And there's no reason not to have growth, given it's the best wheelchair sport there is, team sport there is. So I think that's important, and that's going to help many other things as far as better competition, more players to draw from for the national team. So I think that's really important. The other thing that I think is important that I think needs to be resolved is one of the rules that we have regarding teams with the residency requirement, that every year there seems to be new proposals on how to modify it, change it, eliminate it. And I think it's something that should be, get a group together, study it, and come to a conclusion, because it's something that's come up for probably at least the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Not have resolved it in 20 years. It's not great.
Yeah.
Right? And certainly you have people on many sides as far as thinking what it should be. This needs a consensus need to be come to, so that way that everyone can live with. And some of them might be based on the level of play. I mean, we have some teams that are certainly what you would call probably more towards the elite level, and you have some teams that are more on the recreational level, and there needs to be room for all levels. And maybe the rules need to be slightly different depending on the level that's being played. But there needs to be some sort of consensus, so there's not every year worrying about changing that one of that rules. It's what I've seen, because sometimes it's asked to the officials, well, you need to check this, you need to check that. And as an official, all I want to do is call the game, not determine who's eligible.
Yeah. Based
on where they live, or if they fill out this paperwork and stuff like that.
Yeah, it seems like there would have to be I like what you're saying there, that getting a committee of representation around the league, because right now we just, it's a proposal every year that slightly modifies residency. And I'd like to think we're working towards something better, but maybe just sitting a few folks down and having meetings outside of the AGM and talking it out would be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're seeing it be something that's come up every year or most years for quite a long time. I mean, I say 20, I don't know if it's exactly 20 or not, but it's it's been an issue for quite a while.
Yeah. All right, man. Any last thoughts that you want to share with folks?
Well, what I want to say is, I got involved because my brother, all those years ago, he ended up only playing for about 5 or 6 years. He had health issues and whatever. But what I do know is that by me getting involved, it made me a better person. And I look at, if I give back to the sport, I'm helping other people to achieve what they can and maybe make someone else, want to be that person that improves who they are because they got involved with, as I said, the best wheelchair sport there is.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. And I think we'll get everyone together on Saturday. How about that? And we'll vote on this. But I'm going to wrap it up here, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks.